Welcome to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM the Superstation, the Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, June 23rd, 2019, and we are live tonight. We're back on the air live, okay? I had been off for a couple of weeks. Last week, I was speaking at the Juneteenth Festival in Atlanta. Okay, that Bob Johnson organizes. That was June 14th through the 16th. So if you're watching on Facebook, you're watching on YouTube, you're watching on 910 AM Superstation Online, you see my Juneteenth parade and festival shirt. This is where I got this from. So I was speaking there, connected with a lot of my listeners. I was doing presentations that Saturday and Sunday. So that was a busy weekend, and then the weekend before that, we were off. I don't even remember what was happening. I think our show was preempted by the hockey game. Anyway. But that happened. All right. So then yesterday, it's been a very, very busy few weeks, right? So yesterday, we know Juneteenth happened Wednesday, June 19th, okay? And in the House of Representatives, House Judiciary Committee, there was a congressional hearing on H.R. 40, okay? H.R. 40, House Resolution 40, to form a commission to study slavery, the damages of slavery, and to come up with recommendations for reparations. So that happened on June 19th, Wednesday, June 19th, 2019, and it was historic. It was the first time in 10 years, at least 10 years, that you had a hearing dealing with reparations in Congress, okay? So, some of you saw my Facebook Live broadcast I did on Wednesday, June 19th, dealing with that, and on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, and my personal page, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP. Then also, I talked about some of the history of Juneteenth as well, okay? And we just uploaded the 3-hour Juneteenth lecture that I did on June 11th, so that's available at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and we also I just posted it on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, the African History Network. Juneteenth, Emancipation Day, but not Independence Day. We never got our 40 acres and a mule. Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign, we're coming to get our check, okay? So be sure to order this at our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. It's going to blow you away. I deal with a lot of history in this presentation, okay? So we'll talk some about what happened with the hearing. We'll deal with some of the history of Juneteenth as well. And then we'll talk about Senator Mitch McConnell. Now, you've heard me talk about Senator Mitch McConnell. You've heard me talk about the U.S. Senate. And Senator Mitch McConnell is an obstructionist from Kentucky, okay, Republican from Kentucky. And Senator Mitch McConnell, so different members of Congress and the U.S. Senate were asked about reparations and asked about H.R. 40. And Mitch McConnell says it would be pretty, he says, quote, I don't think reparations for something that happened 150 years ago, for which none of us currently living are responsible, is a good idea, right? So I find it interesting when you have people like this make statements like that, right? But they don't talk about treaties that have been in existence for 200 years or so that are still being honored by the U.S. government. They don't talk about how you have the descendants of Union soldiers who are still getting pensions, okay, or Confederate soldiers for that matter, still getting pensions, their descendants, okay. So I find it interesting. And then they don't talk about the reparations paid to other people. You had about $12 million paid to Seminole Indians about 1970, 1971. We know that Japanese Americans were paid reparations as well because of being put in concentration camps in World War II. We know that in the 2009-2010 stimulus package, there was almost $200 million in reparations paid to Filipino Americans because of an agreement between the U.S. and the Philippines going back to World War II. Okay, so I just find this very interesting. So we're going to dig into some of this history. And then Senator Mitch McConnell, I call him son of a Mitch, right? We had to vote him out of office, right? Okay, he talked about how he had the nerve to say also, he said, quote, we've tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war. Civil war wasn't fought to end slavery. Civil war was fought to bring the South back into the Union. That's why the Civil War was fought. Emancipation Proclamation, January 1st, 1863, that did not free the enslaved Africans. That was a military strategy that Abraham Lincoln was using to bring the South back into the Union, and he threatened the Confederate states, the states in rebellion, that if you do not come back into the Union, your slaves will be free. That was a military strategy. Now, when you go to loc.gov, Library of Congress website, or you go to archives.gov, National Archives, and you actually read the Emancipation Proclamation, it tells you that the states that still hold slaves that are still in the Union, those states, those slaves are not free. So border states like Maryland, Kentucky, Delaware, Missouri, they were still able to maintain their slaves. There were 1 million enslaved Africans that were not freed who were in states that stayed loyal to the Union. So our whole understanding of this history is backwards. So Senator Mitch McConnell had the nerve to say, we tried to deal with our original sin of slavery by fighting a civil war, by passing landmark civil rights legislation. Then he went on to say, quote, we've elected an African American president. I think we're always a work in progress in this country. Well, wait a second. I remember you having a meeting shortly after President Obama was elected and said that you were going to do everything, you and the Republicans were going to do everything they could to make him a one-term president. I remember you blocking his nomination for Supreme Court, Merrick Garland, and kept that Supreme Court seat open for an entire year. Did not allow Merrick Garland to have a hearing. So how could you, on the one hand, say that you elected the U.S. elected the first African American president? Ain't like you helped get President Obama elected, by the way. Let's just keep it real. It's not like Senator Mitch McConnell helped President Obama get elected. Okay? But then how could you do everything you could to block his policies, block his nomination for the U.S. Supreme Court? Not only that, block his nominations after 2014 for the federal bench for the most part. So when Trump became president, there were about 100 federal bench vacancies. These are lifetime appointments. How could you do all that and then somehow claim that as a victory for America, trying to make up for the legacy of slavery, Jim Crow segregation, redlining, things like these, the maldistribution of wealth, power, and resources? So we have to talk about Senator Mitch tonight also, because this is ridiculous. Senator Mitch McConnell says he's against reparations and cites the election of President Barack Obama, even though he worked to block his policies and nominations. Then yesterday at the the NCOBRA conference took place, National Coalition of Blacks for Reparations in America. All right, so I was at the NCOBRA conference. Friday it was at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. And then Saturday, it was at Timbuktu Academy, 10800 East Canfield Street, right? So I caught up with Dr. Leonard Jeffries showed up yesterday. I didn't even know he was coming. Dr. Leonard Jeffries, Dr. Rosalind Jeffries. So Dr. Leonard Jeffries is one of my teachers. You've heard him. You've heard me interview him a number of times. Dr. Greg Carr, chair of the Afro-American Studies Department at Howard University, was there. You see Dr. Greg Carr. You've heard him here on this show, and you've seen him on Roland Martin's show, News One Now, with Roland Martin on TV One, and then on Roland Martin's daily digital show that we share on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, basically every day, Roland Martin Unfiltered. Dr. Mario Beatty from Howard University, professor at Howard University, who also, among other things, teaches a class on the Medu Neter, the hieroglyphics at Howard. So they were all there. Dr. Ray Winbush from Morgan State University, who you've heard me interview before, he was there as well. So we're going to have them on the show the next few weeks because things were so busy I couldn't catch up with them to get interviews. But I did interview Dr. Mark Thompson, and you see him on MSNBC, AM Joy. And I also interviewed Rose Sanders, founder of the Vote or Die campaign out of Selma, Alabama. So we'll share the interview tonight with you that I did with Dr. Mark Thompson dealing with HR 40, because he was actually at the HR 40 congressional hearing. Okay, we'll talk some about that next week. I'll share with you the interview I did with Rose Sanders, who's a longtime activist, and I talk about Rose Sanders in some of my presentations, because in 2016 in Selma, Alabama, she was registering African Americans to vote. And this was during the special U.S. Senate election where Doug Jones was running against Roy Moore, right? And we know Roy Moore has announced he's going to run again, accused of being a pedophile, things like this, right? And she talked about how she was threatened with death. There was a white, she was registering African Americans to vote. And there was a white man who threatened her with death for engaging in this. And this was in 2016, okay? Actually, no, the special election was actually not 2016. I think it was 2017, the special election. I think it was 2017. I know Roland Martin interviewed her about this in some of my presentations. You've seen me talk about this as well. So I'll share the interview I did with Rose Sanders next week. Now, it's interesting that all of this is taking place at the same time. So yesterday was the celebration of life for the Honorable Kwame Kenyatta, former city council member. That took place at the Charles H. Wright Museum of African American History. I was at the Nkoba conference both days, so I couldn't make it over there for that. We saw the Adasi ancestral ceremony that Dr. Kafense Chike organizes, and you hear him on 9:10 a.m. also, Mr. Malik Shabazz show. That was Saturday morning, 7 a.m. Couldn't make it to that, okay, because I overslept and woke up at 6:30, and I had to get to the conference to be able to set up. But also, June 22nd was the anniversary of President Franklin Roosevelt signing the GI Bill. The GI Bill. And when we talk about a maldistribution of scarce wealth, power, and resources, and we talk about the legacy of slavery and how government policies were put in place to segregate communities, to allocate resources into the hands of white Americans at the expense of African Americans, the GI Bill is cited historically as one of those policies that greatly helped to do this. Well, the GI Bill was signed on June 22nd, 1944 to help World War II veterans, right, get to go to school, get funding to go to college, get low-interest loans to buy homes, to get loans to start businesses. But African-American soldiers were largely discriminated against using the GI Bill, even though their taxpayer dollars are paying for that. Now, why didn't the GI Bill benefit African American G.I.s? We're going to talk about that tonight. That ties right into the legacy of slavery. So when people talk about reparations, one, is not talking about blaming white people who are living today for what happened decades, centuries ago. Okay? That's not what it's talking about. It's talking about holding the American government accountable because slavery was written into the U.S. Constitution. Article 1, Section 9 of the U.S. Constitution, Article 4, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution laid the foundation for the fugitive slave laws. Okay, we understand the formation of the not just the 3/5 Compromise, but the 3/5 Compromise of 1787 ties into the creation of the Electoral College. And the 3/5 Compromise is dealing with how do you count the enslaved Africans in the states? How does their population count towards how many seats in the House of Representatives slaveholding states get? And this gave an advantage to the southern states who had slaves to have more enslaved Africans because 3/5 of the population was counted of the slaves that they held, and that went toward their overall population, and that gave them more seats in the House of Representatives. It did not state that it would be 3/5 of a human being. That's a misunderstanding. We've had Dr. Paul Finkelman here on the show, historian, author of 50 books, author of a book dealing with Thomas Jefferson and slavery. We've had him here on the show to break that down. You've heard me talk about that before, and you can read Article 1, Section 2, Clause 3 of the U.S. Constitution. Go to loc.gov, the Library of Congress website, archives.gov, and you can read that. That's a total misunderstanding of history. Okay, so we're dealing with the Constitution drafted at the Philadelphia Convention 1787, debated in 1787, signed September 17, 1787. The U.S. Constitution sanctioned slavery. So we're talking about policies coming from the federal government. The New Deal, the Minimum Wage Act in 1935, the Homeowners Loan Corporation in 1933, which created the redlining, the whole redlining system. The Federal Housing Administration of 1934, the Social Security Administration in 1935. These are all government policies that maldistributed wealth, power, and resources into the hands of white Americans. So when we talk about reparations, it's not about blaming white people for what happened decades ago or centuries ago. It's holding America accountable for laws they put in place that maldistributed wealth, power, and resources. This is what we're talking about. Okay? All right. So we have to deal with the GI Bill. And then also, June 6th, we saw all this commemoration, all this celebration, 75th anniversary of D-Day. June 6, 1944, 155,000 U.S. troops land in Normandy in France, right? Well, by the coverage that you saw in mainstream media, like MSNBC, you would think there were no black soldiers there in Normandy. There were almost 2,000 that landed. June 6, 1944. One of them was Medgar Evers, civil rights activist, field secretary for the NAACP, and the contribution of African American soldiers to D-Day was largely overlooked. How is that possible? I don't even understand that. So we'll talk about that as well on tonight's show. So now on the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world, because right knowledge corrects wrong behavior. What you do for yourself, what you do to yourself, and what you allow other people to do to you and get away with is based upon what you think about yourself. What you think about yourself is based upon what you have been taught about yourself. What you've been taught about yourself is based upon everything you've read, heard, and seen about yourself. So when you control the radius of a man's thoughts, you can control the circumference of his actions, because the mind can't do or teach what it doesn't know. Now we deal with a number of different topics here on the show. We deal with current events and history, education, economic empowerment, entrepreneurship, relationships, love, sex, health issues, and much, much more. Sign up for our email newsletter. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T. Text the word Kemet, K-E-M-E-T, to 22828 to sign up for our email newsletter. Also, visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can register there as well. I want to let you all know that my new online course has just started. It's an 8-week, 16-hour online course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, 2019 edition. Ancient Kemet, which is one of the original names for Egypt, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, 2019 edition. So that is meeting online Wednesday, June 26, 2019. We kick off. We do it live at our online school. The sessions are archived. You can go back and watch them over and over again. Visit AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com for more information and to register. All right, we'll be back in a few minutes. 9:10 a.m. Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep, the African History Network Show. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network Show right here on 9:10 a.m. Superstation, the Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, Brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, June 23rd, 2019, and we are back after being off for a couple of weeks. And I was out of town in Atlanta last weekend, and this weekend I was at the Cobra conference, Cobra Reparations Conference. So I did some interviews there. Also, Sister Starla Muhammad of the Final Call newspaper interviewed me as well. So look out for that interview either this Monday or the following Monday. You'll see the interview that she did with me. Visit finalcall.com. Okay. All right. So those watching on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, I just posted the link where you can register for my new online course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, Understanding the Transatlantic Slave Trade, what they didn't teach you in school, 2019 edition. If you registered for one of the previous classes I've done, because this is the first time I've done it live since September 2017. There's a lot of new archaeological discoveries that have come out, a lot of new information. So this is why this is 16 hours. The previous one was 12 or 14 hours. If you took if you took this class previously, email me at customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, customerservice@AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and we'll register you at 50% off, okay? Because this online course is $80, and we do it live, but all the classes are archived, okay? So you can go back and watch it over and over again. You can watch from around the world as well, okay? And then visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. My latest lecture that I did June 11th. This is a 3-hour presentation dealing with the real history of Juneteenth. Juneteenth, Emancipation Day, but not Independence Day. We never got our 40 acres in the Mule. Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign. We're coming to get our check. All right, this is on sale, $10. Okay, so this past week, I mean, so much was going on. I mean, not even talking about Donald Trump's craziness, right? Not even talking about that. And we have more Democrats who are calling for to start the impeachment inquiry. I think it's close to about 68, something like that. You got another Democrat, for whatever reason, just decided to run for president. So it's now at 24 or 25. We'll see how that goes. But we know that Juneteenth just happened as well. So when we look at Juneteenth, right? Juneteenth commemorates June 19th, 1865, when General Gordon Granger of the Union Army delivered Special Field Order number 15 in Galveston, Texas. And this was letting the enslaved Africans in Texas in general, because he's going through different cities, letting the 250,000 enslaved Africans in Texas know that they were free. Now, this was 2 weeks after the Civil War ended. Civil War basically officially ends June 2nd, 1865. All right? Now, and we know that also you're going to have some slave owners that withhold this information from their enslaved Africans to get another year's worth of work and harvest out of them. So some of them are not going to be freed till 1866. The majority are going to be freed then. But some are not going to be freed to 1866. And if you saw the video that I did, and it's on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, Imhotep. It deals with how new research shows that about 40% of slave owners from 1850 to 1860 were white women. We know that one of the women, named Martha Gibbs, held her slaves until 1866. The History.com, the official website of the History Channel, has an article dealing with this, dealing with the little-known history of women, female slave owners. Okay, so check that out also. All right. Now, on June 19th, 2019, a hearing on H.R. 40 was held in the House Judiciary Committee. And we saw some of the people that Democrats had to testify. We saw Ta-Nehisis Coates, who wrote the fantastic article for the expose for the Atlantic magazine called "The Case for Reparations," and that was in 2014. All right. And I have my copy of it here, put in a plastic bag to bring it to the studio. Okay, this is I think this was the first copy of the Atlantic I ever bought. Okay, when this article came out, you can read it online, but I said no, I have to buy this. Okay, and this brother Ta-Nehisis Coates did his research. He was there testifying and giving some historical background information. Okay. Dealing with slavery, dealing with the maldistribution of scarce wolf-pound resources. You're dealing with 246 years of slavery, 90 years of Jim Crow, 60 years of separate but equal, 35 years of state-sanctioned redlining. All these are government policies. Until we reckon with the compounding moral debts of our ancestors, America will never be whole. You also saw our sister, Dr. Julian Malveaux, okay, who's an African American female economist. You've heard me interview Dr. Julian Malveaux here on this show before. You see her each week on Roland Martin's daily digital show, Roland Martin Unfiltered. And Dr. Julian Malveaux was dropping the science as well and tying the history into economic disparities, the wealth disparity. We saw also the report from the Brookings Institute dealing with how segregation tax is costing Black American homeowners $156 billion in value. You heard me talk about that on this show. We see the article from Curbed.com, C-U-R-B-E-D, Curbed.com, November 27, 2018, how a segregation tax is costing Black American homeowners $156 billion. A new Brookings Gallup report finds residential property in majority Black neighborhoods is consistently undervalued. So all this deals with the legacy of slavery. It's not about blaming, people who are living today for what happened then. But what we're talking about is these issues, these problems were created by federal government policies and laws. So it's going to be federal government policies and laws that correct the disparities. And one of the things that Ta-Nehisis Coates talks about in his article, it's about a 17-page article for the Atlantic, the case for reparations. One of the things he talks about in here is dealing with housing. And we know that for many people, their home is the largest piece of wealth, or the greatest thing of value that they own. He talks about how black families making $100,000 a year typically live in the kinds of neighborhoods inhabited by white families making $30,000 a year. Quote, blacks and whites, then he's citing the study done by Sharkey. Who is this? Dr. Sharkey? Patrick Sharkey, okay? Sociologist at New York University. And Dr. Sharkey said, or Patrick Sharkey said, quote, blacks and whites inhabit such different neighborhoods. That is not possible, blacks and whites inhabit such different neighborhoods that it is not possible to compare the economic outcomes of black and white children, all right? But all this deals with legacy of slavery. But what happens is Americans, you've heard me say this before, Americans are woefully ignorant of history. This is why this study from the Southern Poverty Law Center called Teaching Hard History American Slavery is so important. Teaching Hard History American Slavery. I talked to Dr. Ray Winbush yesterday about this study from Morgan State University, and you'll hear we'll get him back on the show in the upcoming weeks. Go to splcenter.org, splcenter.org, which is the Southern Poverty Law Center's website, and you can download this 52-page study called Teaching Hard History American Slavery. And what this study does is it documents how the history of slavery is being incorrectly taught in American schools, not schools that have a predominantly African American population, but American schools, period. Okay, and it gives numerous recommendations to more correctly teach the history of slavery. Now, one of the things they did in this study is they did a survey of 1,000 12th graders, okay, seniors, high school seniors, 1,000 12th graders, and they found that only 8% of 12th graders surveyed knew that slavery was the central reason why the Civil War was fought. Only 8%, okay. 68% of 12th graders surveyed did not know that it took a constitutional amendment to legally free the enslaved Africans. Okay, that's the 13th Amendment. They had to amend the Constitution. Why did they have to amend the Constitution? Because the Constitution legalized slavery. Okay, so the foundation of law in this country is the U.S. Constitution. And we know Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution says that it says that the U.S. Constitution is supreme law of the land, and all of the previous treaties and all of the subsequent treaties are the supreme law of the land. So if 68% of high school seniors, regardless of race or ethnicity, did not know it took a constitutional amendment to formally end slavery, what does that mean? It means two things. Number one, it means the teachers didn't teach them. Number one. Two, it means their parents didn't teach them. Okay, now this goes into the whole debate and the fight for reparations dealing with the legacy of slavery. America needs a massive history lesson. All this is tied into history. America needs a massive history lesson. Americans are woefully ignorant of history. Okay, so on Wednesday, June 19th, a hearing in the House Judiciary Committee subcommittee for H.R. 40 was held. Okay, and when we look at, if you go to house.gov and search for HR 40, house.gov, search for HR 40, and I'll give you the actual, you can actually read the actual bill. Now, some people are saying, oh, they're trying to pass this bill to get checks paid out. No, this is to do a study. No, it's not to pay, it's not to send checks out. This is to study the legacy of slavery, the impact that it has on African Americans, and to come up with recommendations, okay, for reparations. Cash payments can be part of that recommendation, all right? But if we actually look at, if you go to congress.gov/bill/116th Congress, or just search for H.R.40, okay, just search for that. And you want to look at the 116th Congress, because Representative Sheila Jackson Lee has sponsored a revised H.R. 40. We know it was originally introduced in 1989 by John Conyers, Representative John Conyers. Okay, so when we talk about this, we got to give that brother credit. Because each year, when a new Congress was inaugurated each year, he reintroduced it, and it didn't go anywhere in the Congress. But now, because of midterm elections, Democrats have back control of the House of Representatives. Because you have things like this article written by Ta-Nehisis, okay, 2014. Because you have things like the United Nations panel in September 2016 that did a report and said that the U.S. government owes reparations to African Americans, and you can read one of the articles written about that from the Washington Post, September 29th, 2016. The cost of slavery reparations is now within the boundaries of the politically acceptable. The cost of reparations is now within the boundaries of the politically acceptable. That's September 29th, 2016. So you've had some things that have happened steadily to keep propelling this. We know it came up in the 2016 elections as well. Some people say, oh, they were talking about reparations in 2016 elections. Well, that means, one, you don't listen to this show. Two, that means you don't study politics. Hillary Clinton talked about it. Bernie Sanders talked about it as well. Also, Jill Stein talked about it. I still think Jill Stein was working for Russia. You heard me talk about that before. I still think Jill Stein was working with Vladimir Putin, but that's a whole nother conversation. Go listen to the archives. I break that down. It came up in 2008 election as well, because President Obama said, for whatever reason, he said he was against reparations. Okay, now personally, let's keep it 100. If he said he was for reparations, you know damn well he would not have been elected. I mean, this is keep it real. Okay, but if we look at the revised bill introduced January 3rd, 2019, this is when Democrats were sworn in. The new 116th Congress was sworn in. Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. Here's what it says. The bill establishes the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans. Okay? People are scared. Oh, they're going to start sending out checks next week. No, that's not. No. Listen, okay, calm down. All right. The bill establishes the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans. The Commission shall examine slavery and discrimination in the colonies and the United States from 1619 to the present and recommend appropriate remedies. Appropriate remedies. Why? Because it's a long-lasting problem created by the government. Okay? Now, among other requirements, the Commission shall identify, 1, the role of federal and state governments in supporting the institution of slavery. The role of federal and state governments in supporting the institution of slavery. 2, forms of discrimination in the public and private sectors against freed slaves and their descendants. Okay? The forms of discrimination in the public and private sectors against freed slaves and their descendants. And 3, the lingering negative effects of slavery on living African Americans and society. Okay, so this is what the commission is investigating. Now, if you look at this is what is proposed that the commission investigates. Okay, it has to pass the House and the Senate. All right, this bill. Now, if you look at the article from the New York Times, June 19th, 2019, entitled "Digging into America's Dark Past." Digging into America's dark past. House panel makes history by exploring reparations. Okay, New York Times. This article is written by Cheryl Gay Stolberg, Stolberg. Pretty good article. Okay, in the article it talks about how it talks about the bill, Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act, now sponsored by Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, Democrat of Texas. And it would the bill would authorize, if it passes, it would authorize $12 million for a 13-member commission to study the effects of slavery and make recommendations to Congress dealing with reparations, dealing with remedies. Because reparations, we're talking about repairing damage that's done. Reparations is dealing with repairing damage that was done. Okay, now, if we, I'm going to, now Ta-Nehisis testified, and I'm going to go to let's go to his opening statements here, okay? And he also, in his opening statements, he also responded to Senator Mitch McConnell. Let's go to this clip. And then turn up here so they can hear on Facebook.
America should not be held liable for something that happened.
And then turn up, can you turn up some more here?
That's as high as they can go, unfortunately. It's hitting nicely on the thing, so.
No, so I can hear on Facebook. They hit another button so it plays in the studio.
Oh, yeah, I got you.
While it's on the air.
Of its generations.
Yeah. Just
But well into this century, the United States
from
was
the
still
beginning.
paying
Just
out
start from the
pensions to the
beginning.
heirs of Civil War. Yesterday, when asked about reparations, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell offered a familiar reply. America should not be held liable for something that happened 150 years ago, since none of us currently alive are responsible. This rebuttal proffers a strange theory of governance, that American accounts are somehow bound by the lifetime of its generations. But well into this century, the United States was still paying out pensions to the heirs of Civil War soldiers. We honor treaties that date back some 200 years, despite no one being alive who signed those treaties. Many of us would love to be taxed for the things we are solely and individually responsible for. But we are American citizens, and thus bound to a collective enterprise that extends beyond our individual and personal reach. It would seem ridiculous to dispute invocations of the founders or the greatest generation on the basis of a lack of membership in either group. We recognize our lineage as a generational trust, as inheritance. And the real dilemma posed by reparations is just that, a dilemma of inheritance. It is impossible to imagine America without the inheritance of slavery. As historian Ed Baptist has written, enslavement, quote, shaped every crucial aspect of the economy and politics of America, so that by 1836, more than 600 million, or almost half of the economic activity in the United States derived directly or indirectly from the cotton produced by the million-odd slaves. By the time the enslaved were emancipated, they comprised the largest single asset in America. $3 billion in 1860 dollars, more than all the other assets in the country combined. The method of cultivating this asset was neither gentle cajoling nor persuasion, but torture, rape, and child trafficking. Enslavement reigned for 250 years on these shores. When it ended, this country could have extended its hallowed principles, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness to all regardless of color. But America had other principles in mind. And so for a century after the Civil War, black people were subjected to a relentless campaign of terror, a campaign that extended well into the lifetime of Majority Leader McConnell. It is tempting to divorce this modern campaign of terror, of plunder, from enslavement. But the logic of enslavement, of white supremacy, respects no such borders. And the god of bondage was lustful and begat many heirs. Coup d'etats and convict leasing, vagrancy laws and debt peonage, redlining and racist GI bills, poll taxes and state-sponsored terrorism. We grant that Mr. McConnell was not alive for Appomattox, but he was alive for the electrocution of George Stinney. He was alive for the blinding of Isaac Woodward. He was alive to witness kleptocracy in his native Alabama and a regime premised on electoral theft. Majority Leader McConnell cited civil rights legislation yesterday, as well he should, because he was alive to witness the harassment, jailing, and betrayal of those responsible for that legislation by a government sworn to protect them. He was alive for the redlining of Chicago and the looting of black homeowners of some $4 billion. Victims of that plunder are very much alive today. I am sure they'd love a word with the Majority Leader. What they know, what this committee must know, is that while emancipation dead-bolted the door against the bandits of America, Jim Crow wedged the windows wide open. And that is the thing about Senator McConnell's something. It was 150 years ago, and it was right now. The typical black family in this country has 1/10 the wealth of the typical white family. Black women die in childbirth at 4 times the rate of white women. And there is, of course, the shame of this land of the free, boasting the largest prison population on the planet, of which the descendants of the enslaved make up the largest share. The matter of reparations is one of making amends and direct redress, but it is also a question of citizenship. In H.R. 40, this body has a chance to both make good on its 2009 apology for enslavement and reject fair weather patriotism, to say that a nation is both its credits and its debits, that if Thomas Jefferson matters, so does Sally Hemings, that if D-Day matters, so does Black Wall Street, that if Valley Forge matters, so does Fort Pillow. Because the question really is not whether we will be tied to the somethings of our past, but whether we are courageous enough to be tied to the whole of them. Thank you.
Okay, so that was writer Ta-Nehisis Coates testifying Wednesday, June 19th at the House Judiciary Subcommittee dealing with H.R. 40. Okay, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. There was a call back. I think it was Greg. Call back 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. Okay, so in his expose in the June 2014 issue of the Atlantic, and also you can read the Case for Reparations by Ta-Nehisis Coates at theatlantic.com. You can read it online also. He started out talking about an African American man named Clyde Ross, who was born in 1923. And Clyde Ross is he was the 7th of 13 children near Clarksdale, Mississippi, the home of the blues. And Clyde Ross is going to eventually move to Chicago. Okay, in the 1920s, Jim Crow Mississippi was in all facets of society a kleptocracy. The majority of the people in the state were perpetually robbed of the vote. A hijacking engineered through the trickery of the poll tax, the muscle of the lynch mob between 1882 and 1968. More black people were lynched in Mississippi than in any other state. If you go to NAACP.org, NAACP.org, the official website of the NAACP, they have a page there dealing with the history of lynching, and there were 4,743 people lynched in this country from 1882 to 1968. Mississippi had the most number at 481. So you've heard me talk about that before. And when you had the public hanging woman, Cindy Hyde Smith, who's the U.S. Senator from Mississippi, and she made her comments about a public hanging, we talked about that because that history came out, okay? And when different events take place in the news, different things are said. When you have incidences that take place that have a historical context, then the history comes out and it causes the truths to come out, okay? So from 1882 to 1968, there were 4,743 people lynched in this country. 1,297 were white, okay? Because a lot of people don't know, the Ku Klux Klan and other Ku Klux Klan-like groups, they were not just lynching African Americans, but also white Republicans and lynching Jews as well. Okay, so there were 3,446 African Americans who were lynched during that period of time, 1882 to 1968. So Mississippi had the most number of lynchings, 481. It was also in Mississippi that Medgar Evers was shot and killed, okay, June 12, 1963. We just commemorated the anniversary of his assassination. It was also in Mississippi, so that was in Jackson, Mississippi. It was also in Mississippi, August 28, 1955, that Emmett Till was lynched, okay? That was in Money, Mississippi, okay? It was also in Mississippi that Goodman, Schwerner, and Cheney were killed, the civil rights workers, okay? That was June 21st, 1964, if I remember correctly. That was in Philadelphia, Mississippi. Okay, so Mississippi has a long history of this. And then it was also in Mississippi in 1954 that the White Citizens Council was founded as a direct backlash to the Brown versus Board of Education desegregation ruling, okay, in May of 1954. So all this history is tied together. You have to understand the chronology of history. Okay, so Ta-Nehisis Coates goes on to say the majority of people in the state of Mississippi were perpetually robbed of the vote, hijacking engineered through the trickery of the poll tax and the muscle of the lynch mob. Between 1882 and 1968, more black people were lynched in Mississippi than in any other state. Quote, you and I know what's the best way to keep an N-word from voting, end quote, blustered Theodore Bilbo, B-I-L-B-O, a Mississippi state senator and a proud Klansman. Quote, you do it the night before the election, end quote. You do it the night before the election. So one of the things that came up during the hearing is how lynchings and violence have been historically inflicted upon African Americans. We're talking about after slavery, during Reconstruction, during Jim Crow, after Plessy versus Ferguson, 1896 U.S. Supreme Court case, to terrorize African Americans, to scare them out of voting. Dr. Julia Malveaux talked about the Wilmington Massacre of 1898 in Wilmington, North Carolina. She mentioned Christopher Everett's documentary, Wilmington on Fire. Christopher is a friend of mine, so I knew about the documentary long before it came out. I need to get him on the show to talk about this as well. You know, she talked about the attack on Black Wall Street, the massacre on Black Wall Street, June 1st, 1921. Okay, she talked about, I can't remember, she talked about Rosewood, but we've talked about Rosewood, the Rosewood Massacre, January of 1923 in Rosewood, Florida. And in that case in Rosewood, African Americans were ran off of their land. Okay, they had a population of somewhere around 200 African Americans. Rosewood ran off their land, fleeing for their lives, left their land behind, and the land was confiscated, taken over by white people. Okay, so this is the history. So when we talk about this history, I know we have different listeners, you know, to the show, and different ethnicities listen to the show, things like this. When we talk about this history, this is not hate speech, because I know on YouTube they have new social media rules and things like this dealing with hate speech. Kicked us out of the monetization program. It sent me an email saying my videos now don't qualify for the monetization program, but didn't tell me what I said that was wrong, what actually violated that program. Okay, so it is what it is, whatever. But so we're talking about understanding history of this country, and we're talking about correcting the history. Okay, this is what we're talking about. So this is not hate speech or anything like that. All right. So that's on page 56 of Ta-Nehisis Coates' article. Okay, dealing with the case for reparations. So he goes on to talk about Clyde Ross. Then we're going to go to the phone lines in just a second. So hold on. He said Clyde Ross had tried to get a legitimate mortgage in another neighborhood, but was told by a loan officer that there was no financing available. The truth was that there was no financing for people like Clyde Ross because he was African American. From the 1930s through the 1960s, African Americans across the country were largely cut out of the legitimate home mortgage market through means both legal and extra legal. Legal and extra legal. White people in Chicago employed every measure, from restrictive covenants to bombings, to keep their neighborhoods segregated. Okay, restrictive covenants dealt with in the deeds for the homes. It was written into the deeds that they could not sell that home to someone who was non-white, to keep the community segregated. Okay, their efforts is specifically targeting African Americans. All right, if you were Asian, you may be able to slide, you know, but this is specifically targeting African Americans. This is a legacy of slavery. Their efforts were buttressed by the federal government. In 1934, the U.S. Congress created the Federal Housing Administration. The FHA insured private mortgages, causing a drop in interest rates and a decline in the size of the down payment required to buy a house. This was government policy. This was part of the New Deal, okay? And so on the surface, it's good. The problem was the way it was administered, discriminating against African Americans. The discrimination was not written into the law. It was the way the money was actually distributed. Now, but an insured mortgage was not a possibility for Clyde Ross. The Federal Housing Administration had adopted a system of maps and rated neighborhoods according to their perceived stability. This is called redlining. Redlining was created by the Homeowners Loan Corporation, which is another government entity created by the New Deal, created by the U.S. government, and it was the Homeowners Loan Corporation created in 1933 that created the whole redlining system used by banks to give out mortgages, used by insurance companies to determine how much your insurance rate is going to be. Okay, so the FHA had adopted a system of maps that rated neighborhoods according to their perceived stability. On the maps, green areas rated with the letter A indicated in demand, in demand. Neighborhoods that, as one appraiser put it, lacked, quote, a single foreigner or Negro, end quote. These neighborhoods were considered excellent prospects for insurance. Neighborhoods where African Americans live were rated with the letter D and were usually considered ineligible for Federal Housing Administration backing. They were colored in red. Neither the percentage of African Americans living there nor their social class mattered. Neither the percentage of African Americans living in these areas nor their social class mattered. African Americans were viewed as a contagion. Redlining went beyond FHA-backed loans and spread to the entire mortgage industry, which was already rife with racism, excluding African Americans from most legitimate means of obtaining a mortgage. All right, let's go to the phone lines. Let's go to Joe, line 1. Joe, welcome to the African History Network show. Thanks for holding. Tell us where you're calling from. From Metro Detroit. Okay, we're coming up on a break in a minute, but go ahead.
What I'm calling for is, I enjoy every Sunday information that you put out.
Oh, thanks.
I hear a lot of people talking about reparations.
Mm-hmm.
And my argument about reparations
Right.
is, as a people, we're not going to get reparations until we recognize that we got to come together and stop being weak. See, a house divided against itself can never stand.
Right.
We had to understand our history and recognize ain't nobody coming for us. See, too many of us, I'm trying to say it in the clean way.
Okay.
Too many of us are individuals and not collective, if you understand what I'm trying to say.
Sure.
You can't separate yourself from who you are.
Okay.
You can't hate who you are.
Right.
You can't be afraid of who you are. You got to be a man. And as 60 coming up in my life, I watched us as weak individuals. I watched leaders come to the city and look at Negro preachers and say, we can take this from them, but they don't have no backbone.
Right.
And that's going to be the real problem and the test. Farrakhan made a statement, and when he made that statement, if he ever been true, he was true. And I'm going to leave it right there.
Okay. Yeah, we're coming up on a break also. Thanks, Joe. Thanks for calling in. Thanks for holding. You listen to the African History Network show, 9:10 a.m. Superstation, the Future Radio. I'm Michael Imhotep. 313-778-7600. We'll be back in a few minutes. Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation, the Future Radio. Hey, I'm your host, brother Michael Imhotep. It is Sunday, June 23rd, 2019. Call in numbers 313-778-7600, 313-778-7600. Right before the break, we were talking about the congressional hearing that took place June 19th, 2019 on Juneteenth, dealing with H.R. 40. We were dealing with some history. I was talking about, I was quoting from Ta-Nehisis Coates' 2014 front page article from The Atlantic called The Case for Reparations. The Case for Reparations. You can also read that full article at theatlantic.com, okay? Be sure to visit so those watching on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network, we just posted the link for the new lecture that I just did. June 11th, 2019. It's a 3-hour presentation Juneteenth History, Emancipation Day, but not Independence Day. We never got our 40 acres and a mule. Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign. We're coming to get our check. So this is a 3-hour presentation. I deal with a lot of history here. I deal with why Juneteenth was Emancipation Day and not Independence Day. I deal with why Abraham Lincoln was not an abolitionist, why the Civil War was fought. I break down the Emancipation Proclamation of September 22nd, 1863, which was the initial Emancipation Proclamation, and then the actual one we know about, January 1st, 1863. I deal with the 400th year anniversary of Jamestown, Virginia, August 20th, 1619, even though African people were in the land we call the U.S. going back at least 51,700 years. And then also in 1619, slave statutes did not exist in the 13 colonies also. Okay, the first colony to have a slave statute or slave laws is Massachusetts in 1641. I deal with how Malcolm X was calling for a unification of the civil rights leaders as well while he was still in the Nation of Islam. And I talk about Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign and him talking about how we were locked out of a massive land giveaway of hundreds of millions of acres of land after the Civil War ended. Okay, so this is at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. It's on sale $10. And then and also sign up for the register for the new online course that I'm teaching, and that is on Wednesdays. It'll be this Wednesday, June 26, 2019. It's an 8-week, 16-hour online course, Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Okay, so we deal with thousands of years of history. We do a better understanding of the transatlantic slave trade, and I deal with all of this chronologically. Okay, we can't start studying the transatlantic slave trade in the mid-15th century. We have to deal with the 800-year occupation of Europe by the Africans known as the Moors, who take the teachings from ancient Egypt, ancient Kemet into Europe, and this brings Europe out of the Dark Ages. All right, so we posted that link there. Also visit AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. You can register there as well. Okay, let's go back to the phone lines. Let's go to line 2. Let's go to this Errol. How you pronounce your name? Errol. Okay. All right, Errol. Tell us where you're calling from.
I'm from Jackson, Mississippi.
Jackson, Mississippi. Okay, that's where Medgar Evers was. Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, go ahead.
Just drop a lot of knowledge about that. I just want to comment on a couple things. I don't know how much time I got.
Go ahead.
But I was just hearing you talk about the man Ross. I was just reading.
Clyde Ross. Clyde Ross. Yes.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir. Y'all please come to the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum in Jackson, Mississippi, and check it out.
Okay. They talk about Clyde Ross in the museum?
Yes, sir. It's a Civil Rights Museum. It's brand new.
Right.
It's beautiful. It's huge. A lot of exhibits, a lot of information. Over the course of 2 days, I spent 10 hours in it to see everything.
Oh, wow.
And the directors, I met the directors and the security guards who are police and state officers were all very excited that a man of my demographic would come in and spend him a time of dedication. And I sort of got a name for myself around here, so they let me break a couple rules.
Okay. All right, go ahead. Did you have another comment?
Yes, sir. This is Prospect Hill. I'm reading about, you mentioned the name Ross. This Revolutionary War veteran Isaac Ross founded Prospect Hill Plantation after settling in Jefferson County in 1808 in Mississippi. Ross died 28 years later. His grandson Isaac inherited the plantation and the people enslaved. The plantation slaves grew cotton, waves shipped to New Orleans via steamboats. Ross freed the families enslaved people in his will, but Wade contested the document and maintained slavery at the plantations. After a long legal battle, the Mississippi Supreme Court upheld the original will, and some 300 Ross family slaves immigrated to West Africa and founded the Mississippi Colony in Liberia.
Okay. What's the name of that article?
Just one thing. That's at the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum.
Okay.
This is about Prospect Hill.
Prospect Hill. Okay.
I had to go to my Instagram page. I'm at Ross Red on Instagram. I have a lot of followers in Detroit.
Okay.
And this is one of them. I also want to talk about the slave concentration camp in Natchez, Mississippi, the Devil's Punch Bowl.
Devil's Punch Bowl. Yeah, I've talked about that before. Go ahead.
Okay, that was it. Well, you know about it, that's fine. You know, I got a couple of things. It is a quote from one of the editorial in the Vicksburg Sun back in 1860. A large plantation and slaves are the goals of every Southern gentleman's ambition. All who dare to aspire at all look to this as the goal of their ambition.
Right.
Then you have, John Quitman, who owned slaves, and eventually he was the first leader of the secession statement from Mississippi. So, I know a lot about the history.
The secession, yeah, the statements of secession. The statements of secession were Mississippi declaring that they are seceding from the Union. Yeah.
Right, and John Quitman was a governor. He was a New York native, which I always found crazy. He was a carpetbagger who they didn't like, but he came. That's crazy. So, because they have a real problem with that. The carpetbaggers and the scallywags, as they call them.
Right, coming from the north.
Yeah. A planter is a slave owner who owned more than 20 slaves. And he was a planter, and he was a lawyer, and he served as a major in the Mexican-American War in between the two terms. He had 2 terms in Mississippi. Quitman owned more than 300 slaves and argued that now that new U.S. territory should be open to slavery. After his involvement in the unauthorized military expedition to Cuba, to take Cuba, Quitman had to resign to defend himself in federal court. Quitman pressed for a white Southern nation based on slavery, but he died before Mississippi left the Union.
Right. Okay.
All this is stuff that I, took pictures of, whatever, in the Civil Rights Museum. But I have a plethora of information. I'm into reading Nikola Tesla and Walter Russell right now.
Okay.
So,
absolutely. All right, Errol, keep listening, man, and visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, and also register, if you can, register for the online course that I'm teaching as well, 8-week, 16-hour online course also. All right?
I'll look into it after this month.
Okay, no problem, man. Okay, keep listening.
All right, thanks, brother.
All right, thanks. Okay, let's go to line 3. Let's go to John. Line 3, John, welcome to the African History Network show, and tell us where you're calling from.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm calling from the east side of Detroit.
All right, John.
Tim, thank you, man. You gave the people tonight a real good education and knowledge, man.
Oh, thanks.
So I have to tell you, I really appreciate that, and I hope the people heard you, that they will appreciate it. Now, you said that only 18% of the students know what the...
No, 8%. Only 8%. The study, Teaching Hard History, American Slavery, from the Southern Poverty Law Center. They did a survey of 1,000 high school seniors, and only 8% of the high school senior survey knew that slavery was the central reason why the Civil War was fought.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm amazed. I want to ask you, what is these African American college teaching? I know a lot of people that don't know, they probably don't want to know, but the African American college students should know a lot more than that.
Right. Well, keep in mind, this study was done across the country, so it wasn't just. It was looking at high school students of all ethnicities, not just African American high school students. Okay, I'm not sure of the racial makeup. It may tell in the study. I don't remember the racial makeup of the 1,000 high school senior survey. And this is looking at schools all across the country, not just schools that have a predominantly African American student body or teaching staff. Okay, so it's looking all across the country.
Well, I was trying to hope that they would invite you to speak to them, speak to these college students and so forth.
Right. Well, these are high school students. Yeah, these are high school seniors, 12th graders.
Yeah. Okay. I'm thinking about these college students. Some of them are college students or what?
No.
I'm interested in knowing that about the college students. I just wanted to say, that next week I'm hoping that these African American congressmen and senators should let this character from Kentucky know that he's ignorant and he don't know what he's talking about.
Who are you talking about?
Talk about the senator down there.
Mitch McConnell?
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Okay.
He spoke up today. He didn't have a clue what he was talking about.
Right.
And I want some of these the black senators to let him know that he was wrong in 2 left shoes about what you said.
All right.
Congratulate you. for educating people like that. And keep up the good work.
Okay, John. Thanks for calling.
Thank you.
All right.
Like anyone that
Well, and they're only okay. Thanks, John. And they're only well.
I mean,
there are 3 black senators in the U.S. Senate. Tim Scott, Black Tea Party Republican in South Carolina,
Correct, but I mean, like,
is siding with Mitch McConnell, as Tim Scott oftentimes does. And then Senator Cory Booker is more concerned about going after Joe Biden, because Cory Booker is polling at about 4% in national polls. He's lost ground over the past few weeks. So he's more so Senator Cory Booker is going after Joe Biden harder about Joe Biden talking about working with segregationist Democrats who were senators in the U.S. Senate to get bills passed. Because if you know anything about the U.S. Senate, that's what you have to do to get bills passed. Okay, and then and Cory Booker is talking about being hurt by Joe Biden's usage of the word boy. And if you saw Joe Biden on Politics Nation on June 22nd, Reverend Al Sharpton's show, MSNBC, he talked about how the reason why the U.S. Senator Esau, I think was his name, called him son was because he thought Joe Biden was too young to be in the U.S. Senate. He said he said he didn't call me senator, he called me son. But he also said on Reverend Al Sharpton's show that that same Esau, that same U.S. segregationist senator, who was a Democrat, he called Senator Ted Kennedy boy, who was white.
Yep, exactly. Bye.
So this whole thing is a bunch of BS, really. If you actually understand the full context and this whole thing is a bunch of BS. I guarantee you, Cory Booker was not running for president. If he was polling at like 20% as opposed to 4%, this wouldn't even be an issue. So my thing is, you talking about, he's on CNN talking about the words are hurtful, things like that. If you're a black man running for president in a country that's 63% white, if you hurt by the usage of the word boy, you need to drop out right now, because I guarantee you it's going to be a whole lot more hurtful words coming your way. If you so sensitive and hurt by that, come on, man. Come on. But anyway, that's a whole nother conversation. Okay? Should Biden apologize? Yeah, he should apologize just so people stop talking about it. If you actually understand the full context of this. And he's talking, and see, the thing that a lot of people don't want to talk about, right? A lot of those segregationist Southern Democrats, they're going to end up leaving the Democratic Party and go to the Republican Party, where they are right now, along with people like Senator Mitch McConnell. That's where they are now. So the whole, I listen to the back and forth, and I listen to Dr. Jason Johnson. I listen to, some African Americans. It was hurtful and all this. I'm like, are you serious? Did you listen to the full comments? This is a bunch of nonsense. You just had Donald Trump this past week double down on not coming out and admitting the Central Park 5 had been exonerated after he took out a full-page ad in the New York in 4 New York daily newspapers calling for the death penalty to be brought back so they could be put to death. After DNA evidence clears them, after they had been totally exonerated, he's still siding with the prosecutors and things like this. All this came about because of the 4-part documentary that's on Netflix from director Ava DuVernay called When They See Us. African American journalist for American Urban Radio, April Ryan, asked Trump this question about the Central Park 5. Remember in 2016 campaign, it came up, and the reason why she asked him about it is because he is in the first installment of the 4-part. It's not a documentary; it's a miniseries. Okay, I prefer documentaries over miniseries like this when we do a history. But anyway, so she asked this question. He doubles down because he's ignorant and he's a white supremacist. This is what he is. Okay, he didn't want to admit he made a mistake. He didn't want to admit they've been exonerated. And these boys have gotten to would admit now. They've received death threats also. Okay, so you got. Instead of people talking about that more so than Biden's comments, and then Trump, it was either Tuesday or Wednesday this past week, he had his official rally announcing he's running for re-election. And he's really running for re-election to run out the statute of limitations of some of these charges. That's what that really is about. So, you, on MSNBC, they show footage of white supremacists outside his rally, waiting to get inside, flashing white power symbols, or the alleged white power symbol, because they hijacked the OK symbol. We talked about the history of that. A lot of that started as a hoax on the 4chan white supremacist chat board, whatever it's called. So instead of people focusing on that, they're talking about Biden. The whole thing's a bunch of nonsense. I'm like, look, if Democrats are going to go after their front runner on this, you're going to self-destruct. I mean, I'm just keeping it real with you. That happened on Wednesday. They were still talking about it yesterday and today on MSNBC. You still going after your front runner over that? After what happened this week with Trump, you must want to lose. All right. We'll go back to the phone lines in just a minute. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. 313-778-7600 is the call-in number if you have a question or comment. Now, on Stephanie Rule's show on MSNBC, June 20th, she talked to Dr. Jason Johnson, politics editor at TheRoot.com, and she also talked to Donnie Deutsch, and they were talking about the hearing that took place with H.R. 40. Okay, let's go to this clip.
Peter McConnell cited civil rights legislation yesterday, as well he should, because he was alive to witness the harassment, jailing, and betrayal of those responsible for that legislation by a government sworn to protect them. He was alive for the redlining of Chicago and the looting of black homeowners of some $4 billion. Victims of that plunder are very much alive today. I am sure they'd love a word with the majority leader.
Journalist and author Ta-Nehisis Coates going directly at Majority Leader Mitch McConnell during yesterday's congressional hearing on reparations. On Tuesday, McConnell said he doesn't believe reparations are necessary and that the U.S. has made enough major gains by passing civil rights legislation and electing an African American president. Jason Johnson, Donnie Deutsch back with me. Jason, what's your reaction to Coates' comments and put into perspective the whole picture and how strategic Mitch McConnell is, whether you like him or not?
So two things. One, what Coates said was brilliant. It's true. It's factual. You know everything about how the Republican Party feels, that Democrats put up like an economist and a PhD and a brilliant writer, and the Republicans put out a Columbia junior and another guy who was a former NFL player from the 1970s. The absolute refusal to even have discussions. Remember, this is just for a bill to research it. The refusal to even have a discussion.
People don't realize that, Jason. People don't realize this is just for a bill to discuss how do we improve things.
Right. And Mitch McConnell's attitude is basically, I don't care, because Mitch McConnell isn't overly concerned about addressing the inequality in our government and our economy and the lack of humanity with which large swaths of America are perceived. Reparations is not just an issue about feeling good. I don't care about feeling good. I care about a nation that is justified in its behavior. I care about a nation that treats me and people who look like me fairly. I care about a nation that acknowledges the fact that these policies didn't just magically end when the civil rights movement ended and Martin Luther King was killed, that there is still massive discrimination in the economy and in our government and in criminal justice today. To the degree that Mitch McConnell doesn't want to address that, he defines what the Republican Party is today.
Donnie?
Mitch McConnell, the fact that he's the ignorance and the abhorrence of saying, oh, we elected a black president, so that kind of evens the score of the most deplorable history notion of who we were as a country with slavery. Having said that, and I keep going back to the world is not okay until we beat Donald Trump. You want to solve racial issues, you want to solve immigration issues, and that this issue, forget that the issue itself morally and nobly is the right thing to talk about and address. Weaving it into the political discourse in this political campaign is going to be very damaging to America. So I am just talking about, I want this evil man out of office.
Jason, to this point.
And by the way, giving...
Welcome back to the African History Network show right here on 910 AM Superstation WFDF. I'm Michael Imhotep, host of the African History Network show. It's Sunday, June 23rd, 2019. So we're talking about the HR 40 Congressional Hearing that took place Wednesday, June 19, 2019, on Juneteenth. All right, and then also go watch the video I did on June 19th also. I dealt with some of the history, briefly some of the history of Juneteenth, but I dealt with the congressional hearing, okay? That's on our YouTube channel, Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP, and our Facebook fan page, The African History Network, The African History Network. Click on videos. And also my latest lecture, I did not have this with me in Atlanta because I was in the process of converting it to DVD and editing it. But it's a 3-hour presentation I did on June 11th. And this deals with the real history of Juneteenth, why it's Emancipation Day and not Independence Day. Juneteenth history, Emancipation Day, but not Independence Day. We never got our 40 acres in the Mule. Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign. We're coming to get our check. I deal with a lot of history here. Also deal with August 20th, 1619, Jamestown, Virginia. I deal with some of the history of those 29 Africans who were from Angola, who were originally on the San Juan Batista slave ship that was owned by the Portuguese. And when they come into Jamestown, Virginia in 1619, contrary to popular belief, there are no slave laws in those 13 colonies. First slave laws come into existence in Massachusetts in 1641. Okay, so we have this at AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. I also posted the link on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network. This is on sale, $10. And register for my online course that we have. Session number 2 starts up this Wednesday, June 26th, 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. Kemet's one of the original names for Egypt. Ancient Kemet, the Moors, and the Ma'afa, understanding the transatlantic slave trade, what they didn't teach you in school. This is a 8-week, 16-hour online course. Okay, session 1, we did an intro to this information. We do it live. All the sessions are recorded, so as soon as you register, you can watch session 1. There's also about 36 hours of bonus content. And the previous class that I did, September 2017, is there as well, archive. You can watch that also as soon as you register. So it's on sale, $80, regularly $130. You can watch from all around the world. You can watch it over and over again. And we deal with this history chronologically as much as possible. Okay, so when we discuss the transatlantic slave trade, we have to first understand that African people are the original people of North, Central, and South America and have been in what we call the United States at least 51,700 years. And that's based upon archaeological evidence. We're dealing with the Khoisan, who have the oldest DNA on the planet. They're the ancestors to the Ainu and the Twa. They come from Southern Africa, the short-statured Africans, and they go all around the world. We can't start studying our history in slavery. Even when we study the transatlantic slave trade, which is important to study, we can't start in 1619 or in the 1440s when the Portuguese get involved, because the Portuguese dominate the transatlantic slave trade for the first 200 years. We have to understand the history chronologically and deal with the 800-year occupation of the Africans known as the Moors, who enter into the Iberian Peninsula, today known as Spain and Portugal, from North Africa. They're going in usually through Morocco in 711 AD. So we deal with all this history, and what the Moors teach the Europeans is going to bring Europe out of the Dark Ages. They're taking teachings from ancient Kemet, ancient Egypt, into Europe, and they're taking the light from ancient Kemet into Europe and bring Europe out of the Dark Ages, and this is going to lead to the transatlantic slave trade taking place. Okay, all right, so register for that, and we'll see you in class on Tuesday. Okay, let's go back to the clip I was playing right before the break. This is once again from Stephanie Rule's show, MSNBC, Slavery Reparations Bill Debated at House Hearing from June 20th, 2019. Let's go back to this clip.
So I keep coming back to evil in the White House. Got to get it out. Maybe it's a discussion for another day.
And this takes you back to Joe Biden.
Exactly.
Well, you didn't. Many people can say, why is he saying that? This week, the president doubled down on his take on the Central Park Five,
right,
who in 1989 he took out an ad in the New York Times and said, let's bring back the death penalty. We're not talking about that, and we're talking about how Joe Biden should have chosen different people's names to say. Is this a mistake?
With our discussion of the Central Park Five, with our discussion of deportation, the concern that a lot of people have out there is that if Joe Biden has these kind of attitudes, he's just going to be Donald Trump light. And that's what people
But is Donald Trump light better than Donald Trump?
If you're still dying in the streets and if you're being
Joe Biden is a far way from Donald Trump.
Yes, he is, but the perception that he would be Donald Trump light is a legitimate concern on the part of voters.
How much time is left in that clip? Okay, that's
Done.
it. Okay, put me back on. All right, so check that out, msnbc.com. Slavery reparations bill debated at House hearing. Okay, now
And to name, can I get a name?
we'll go back to the phone lines in just a minute. Phone lines are lighting up as well. Okay, 313-778-7600 is the call-in number. Okay, I'm going to give you the name of some of these articles here because we're running out of time. And I still want to talk about the GI Bill. Okay, D-Day we'll probably have to get to next week, next Sunday. But I may do a special. I'll probably do a special broadcast this week talking about it as well. All right, check out the article from the New York Times, "Digging into America's Dark Past. House Panel Makes History by Exploring Reparations." New York Times. Dr. William A. Darity Jr., who's a professor of public policy at Duke University, who's writing a book about reparations, he stated in a telephone interview with the New York Times, talking about the hearing that took place. He said that, quote, "We have not had a conversation about reparations on this scale or level since the Reconstruction era." Okay, Reconstruction 1865 to 1877. Quote, "To be blunt, I am more optimistic than I ever have been in my life about the prospect of the enactment of a reparations program that is comprehensive and transformative." Okay, and he's a professor of public policy at Duke University. Now, nearly 60 House Democrats, including Speaker Nancy Pelosi, support the bill, H.R. 40, and at least 11 Democratic presidential candidates, with former Vice President Joseph Biden, a notable exception, have embraced either the concept of reparations or the bill to study it. Now, in the broadcast I did on June 19th, talking about the hearing, I did it after the hearing took place. I cited a spokesperson for Joe Biden. I haven't heard him talk specifically on reparations, but there was an article from Vice.com, and I want to get the exact quote here. Okay, so let me pull this up. I want to get the exact quote, and it dealt with, let's see here. Name of the article is "Democrats Want to Tackle Reparations, but Joe Biden isn't so sure." Okay, so here is what a spokesperson said. I haven't heard Biden say this himself. Here's what a spokesperson said. This article is from June 19th, 2019 also. And let's see, let's scroll down here. "Biden has staked out a position as somewhat old-fashioned moderate who would welcome compromise with Republicans, blah, blah, blah." Let's see. All right, I'll pull up the exact quote. I have to find it since okay, I have to find the exact quote in here. It's in this article. I'll get to it. Let's do this. Let's go back to the phone lines. Let's go to who we have. Chuck. Chuck, line 48. Chuck, thanks for holding, man. Welcome to the African History Network show. Tell us where you're calling from.
Thanks, Mike. Imhotep. Calling from Detroit.
Okay, Detroit. Go ahead with your question or comment.
Yes, sir. Listen, have you read the book or heard the book from Michelle Obama? The book is called Becoming.
I've heard of the book. I haven't read it yet, but I've heard of it.
Oh man, you got to check that out for real. It goes deep into instead of hearsay, it goes deep into Michelle's voice. You know, because I listen to the voice recorders. You know, books.
Okay.
You know,
books on CD, books on tape, books, audio books.
Well, talking book topics due to my vision.
Right.
You know, and they have them in the library. Talking book topics.
Okay.
And Michelle Obama has a book in particular called Becoming.
Right.
Yeah, and it goes deep into the philosophy of what it is when it comes to the political arena.
Okay.
You know what I'm saying? And it's deep, man, for real. The book is called Becoming by Michelle Obama.
Yes.
Yeah, it's deep, man. It's deep.
Okay.
And quick comment.
Go ahead.
I know you guys. When it comes to ethnicity, I mean, like, she, in particular, you know, like you mentioned earlier, that the DNA, and the genetics, bloodline goes, you know, or as well as the DNA was that deoxynucleic
The deoxyribonucleic acid. That's what DNA stands for.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. That's like chemistry then, huh?
Yeah.
And that, I think, those things are very interesting when you express the certain parts of the anatomy as well as the blood, the kidneys and the whole 9 yards, And we got to watch out for them transplants.
Right.
Thanks for taking my call, man. And check out that book, man. It's deep, man. For real. It's called Becoming by Michelle Obama, the #1 first lady.
Right. Right. I understand, man. Okay.
Thanks, brother.
Okay. Thanks for calling. All right. Let's see here. The quote from the Biden spokesperson said that in a statement to Vice.com this week for a story about healthcare reparations, a Biden spokesperson said the former vice president, quote, believes that we should gather the data necessary to have an informed conversation about reparations, but he has not endorsed a specific bill, end quote. Okay. The article goes on to say that means, unlike the majority of the 2020 field, Biden does not necessarily support a reparations commission. The latest issue separating him from the progressives, from the progressives he's running against. Okay, so I haven't heard Biden specifically say that himself, but this is an unnamed spokesperson who spoke with Vice.com. Okay, so read this article. From Vice.com, June 19, 2019, entitled Democrats Want to Tackle Reparations, but Joe Biden Isn't So Sure. And the article goes on to say, let's see here, his statement on reparations matched that of a candidate perfectly content to play it safe, as his critics have charged. Dr. William Darity of Duke University, a professor of economics, African American studies, and public policy at Duke University, and a leading scholar on reparations, said in reference to Biden, he said, quote, I have the sense that he is trying to play to a segment of Trump's voting base that he thinks can be swayed to vote for the Democratic Party again. Okay? Consequently, there's absolutely no way he would indicate that he was supportive of any aspect of a move to achieve reparations for Black American descendants of folks who were enslaved, end quote. Now, that's Dr. William Darity. So read this entire article. I don't have time to get through the whole article. Read this entire article from Vice.com, V-I-C-E. We'll post a link here on the thread of the broadcast on our Facebook fan page, the African History Network also, okay? Let's do this. I got to pull up this clip here dealing with from Dr. Julian Malveaux, because I didn't send that clip to you. But I want to go to the interview I did with Dr. Mark Thompson, okay? So you see so I interviewed Dr. Mark Thompson at the Cobra conference dealing with reparations. The national conference was held in Detroit, the 20th through the June 20th through the 23rd, and we were at Timbuktu Academy, and we were talking about the hearing. He was actually at the hearing. The HR 40 hearing. Okay, let's go to this. Let's go to this interview here. Okay, we'll get that pulled up. We'll get that. So that's coming up. And we had a good conversation dealing with the reparations. He talked about what's taking so long. He talked about the process. Let's go to this clip. Okay, it's on YouTube. It's the YouTube clip I sent you.
Gotcha.
All right.
The interview?
The interview, yes. Okay. Okay, let's go to this clip. What's up, everybody? Hey, this is Michael Imhotep, host of the African History Network show on 9:10 a.m. the Superstation. Hey, I'm here with Dr. Mark Thompson. You've seen him on MSNBC a lot. We are here at the Timbuktu Academy of Science and Technology. We're here for the Cobra conference dealing with reparations. Okay, how you doing today, Father?
Thank you for having me, man.
All right, absolutely.
Appreciate you.
No problem, man. I like seeing you on MSNBC. I like hearing you talk about the current issues, especially issues pertaining to African Americans. And we know that on Wednesday, June 19th, in the House Judiciary Subcommittee, there was a congressional hearing dealing with HR 40 and dealing with reparations and forming a commission to study reparations, the damage done to African Americans, and come up with proposals. So what did you think about the congressional hearings that took place?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, brother.
No problem.
I appreciate the important work that you continue to do.
Thank you.
And I hope you will keep it up.
Absolutely.
The hearing was historic.
Yes.
Because this is a new HR 40, an HR 40 2.0, so to speak, no longer whereas the previous bill was about studying slavery.
Yes.
This is about studying what form reparations should take.
Yes.
For slavery and all the vestiges.
The vestiges, the legacy of slavery.
Everything.
Redlining.
Mentioned the whole thing.
Absolutely.
So it was very, very important. And, you know, a brother just asked me outside, why is it taking so long?
Yes.
Well, those who would ask that probably wouldn't have made it when our people were enslaved.
Exactly.
That took several hundred years.
Well, it's 246 years of slavery.
Yeah.
1619 to 1865.
Yeah. Well, but then
just in the 13 colonies.
Yeah, just in 13 colonies.
Yes.
You want to get into the whole Caribbean and the whole all
448 years.
Right. So
1440 to 1888, basically in Brazil.
So if we start counting, we might as well give it up.
Yeah, you know, exactly.
If we think we gonna have microwave revolution.
Exactly.
But it built up to this, and so I think that the hearing was tremendous. I think it probably changed a lot of people's minds.
Yes.
I was saying to someone else in an interview earlier who asked me, you know, why the issue has become so mainstream today. And I said it's because of the continuum of struggle.
Exactly.
It just didn't pop up one day.
Exactly.
This has been a continuum of struggle.
Absolutely.
And so in that regard, I think that this is a very important day.
Well, you know, this also deals with the power of the vote.
Yeah.
Because if African Americans and other people did not show up in midterm elections in November 2018,
right.
Democrats would not have taken control of the House of Representatives. That means they are in control of all of the committees, the subcommittees. They can determine which hearings take place. This would not have happened, okay? And one of the things, personally, I think that there should have been more historians on the panel. I know Dr. Julie Malveaux, who's an economist. I've interviewed her before. She was superb. I think she really did a good job. Ta-Nehisis codes, etc. But even with the lack of the number of historians on the panel, one of the great things that happened afterwards is that a number of articles have been written about this to get deep into the history and why reparations are important. And also, I was reading an article from the New York Times dealing with how reparations has been paid before, and they give all these other groups that got reparations. We deal with Native Americans, Japanese after World War II, and this is a teaching moment also. So talk about the importance of that as well, because like you said, a lot of people think this is a microwave solution, and it's a long process.
It is a long process. And this is just the beginning in terms of legislation. But again, for the first time in history, you have a Speaker of the House and legislation.
Yes.
You have a judiciary.
Nancy Pelosi.
You have a judiciary chair with the power to call a hearing.
Right.
What comes after that is markup. What comes after that is vote.
Yes.
And there will be a vote probably for the first time ever on reparations. And you know, the power of the vote is something.
Yes.
Democrats know. If they didn't get it before, they got it now. You need a black vote.
Yes.
Without us, you're not in power.
Exactly.
So if you want to stay in power, you have to respect the things that we want and demand.
Right.
And one of those things, most important, is reparations. So you have to listen now, and you have to do that. And you know, I think it's also hard. I was saying to another sister who was another interviewer with the final call about. She was asking why this again so
Sister
mainstream.
Starl, I think it was. She interviewed me as well. Yes.
Which is so mainstream.
Yes.
Why it's so mainstream. Even amongst white progressives.
Yeah.
Who we've seen over the past, at the same time as reparations was building momentum.
Right.
In the past 20 years,
right.
The LGBT movement. This is the women's movement has renewed itself, feminism.
Right.
Progressives, white progressives, making the case for against income inequality.
Right.
It's only so long that you can demand justice in your situation.
Right.
And then when someone else's injustice is presented to you, how long can you look in the mirror, take yourself seriously without accepting that?
And ignore it. Absolutely.
And so that created the environment.
Yes.
For Ta-Nehisis piece in the Atlantic
in 2014.
That's right.
That really helped propel it in the Atlantic, which is a historic publication, been around something like 140 years.
And an unassailable argument.
Absolutely. He did the research. He did the work. It's the 17-page expose
couldn't be knocked down.
Exactly.
So all of that, I think, has led to this moment. And, you know, we've seen other moments in the past that we thought big breakthrough.
Right.
But it's one big breakthrough on top of another big breakthrough.
Exactly.
The breakthroughs keep coming.
Exactly.
And so the next big breakthrough will be something else we'll be able to have.
Well, lastly, you know, 2020 elections are coming up. We hear the candidates running. Right now, you got 24 Democrats running. Okay, after the first two debates, I think a lot going to drop out, number one. But what's some people are saying, no reparations, no vote. My thing is, well, you must want Donald Trump for another 4 years. Because Trump ain't talking about reparations. And Mitch McConnell has already said he's against reparations. Well, if he stays as Senate Majority Leader, the vote is not going to come up in the U.S. Senate. Explain how we have to navigate through this.
How long? Where is this going to air?
YouTube, Facebook, on 9:10 AM Superstation WFDF here in Detroit, my Facebook fan page, the African History Network.
So you want to stay on YouTube at 9:10 AM, right?
Yeah.
So as you know,
right.
So the question you asked me is, if I address that,
right,
they may try to put you off like they put me off.
Okay.
So maybe, you know, maybe you don't want me to address it. But
okay.
I tell you what, I'll address it. Y'all already coming after me, so just stay on me. Don't come for this brother. He asked me. Don't punish him.
Right.
Don't make him suffer for what I'm about to say.
Okay.
You are absolutely right.
Right.
What people do is, in terms of trying to divide our people,
yes,
the black vote's the most powerful thing there is.
Yes.
So you got to divide and conquer and discover. So what people do is, they latch on to an aspect of our movement to kill two birds with one stone.
Right.
So
right.
you can introduce people who don't know any better,
right,
to a branch of our movement that never existed before. All right. And then at the same time discredit the overall movement. Right. Because then everybody else says, but them people for reparations are crazy. Right. Because they saying not to vote. Wait, nobody for reparations said that those of us who've been in the struggle.
Exactly. And
I never said
was filed in 1987.
They ain't never said don't vote.
Right.
Right. So anybody saying no reparations, no vote, you need to question that. Exactly. Now, y'all may not want to admit this, but I was at the hearing. Some of them folk came in.
HR 40.
Yeah, some of them folk came in loaded for baby. Now you're in a situation where somebody come ready for a fight, and ain't no fight. Right. You know, and they looking for right. And what I think people heard in that hearing, and what I think people saw, some of you watching at home, was that there's nothing to disagree with.
Right. If you understand the history, ain't nothing to disagree with.
But there's nothing on the table to fight about. So I said to some people who were there, I said, well, what did you disagree with? They said they couldn't come with us, so you start attacking me, you know. Right. Because that's what people do. But politics is politics. And like it or not, the reparations movement for decades, in terms of grassroots, was housed within our Pan-Africanist and black nationalist struggle. Yes. It married itself to the mainstream through John Conyers.
Okay, HR 40, 1989,
right,
who represented John Conyers.
Which proves that, you know, people do what they have to do to work in coalition. And that was, I was here, but I was too young. I'm still young, by the way. Right. Very young. I'm a millennial. and why everybody laughing? So, you just brother over here laughing. So, as a young person, then and now, I was too young to have made that decision, but the Pan-Africanism movement, the revolutionaries made a decision to ally themselves with John Conyers and elect a Democrat right here.
13th Congressional District
in the city of Detroit. Yes. Okay, so that bid was made. Okay. You know, I didn't start that. Okay. I didn't create it. No, none was. Everybody who's working with Sheila Jackson Lee now and other members of Congress. You know, I interviewed Nancy Pelosi. She said to me on camera, I support HR 40. Okay. Oh, he went to her. But I didn't start it. That started with John Conyers. Okay. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Exactly. As Dr. Clark said, there's a continuum of history. Right. So this didn't just pop up last week. Dr. John Henry Clark. Yeah, this didn't pop up last week. Correct. So the decision was made in the reparations movement to deal with it legislatively, which is not unreasonable. How else is going to happen? It's going to be law. But let's be practical. Got 3 branches covered. Let's go to the Supreme Court. Right. What's their history with us? No good. And right now, let's deal with something let's deal with another movement. Let's deal with the women's movement. They're illegally striking down women's laws to have access to reproductive choice, which is against the law. Roe v. Wade made that constitutional. 1973. But nobody wants to take it to the Supreme Court because you don't have the votes.
Right.
And if you go up there, they're going to strike down Roe v. Wade. So you see, it's not even strategic. It's the same thing. We don't have the votes for reparations on the Supreme Court. You can't expect the president in power now to do an executive order.
Exactly.
And it's money, so Congress is actually supposed to appropriate Article 1 of the Constitution. So the numbers exist in Congress at the moment.
Yes.
You got 60 co-sponsors. The Democrats control the House, and we can call for the question, up and down vote, roll call, see where people are, and I think that's how we move forward. And I think what people saw the other day, that's something that is tangible.
Yes.
Now, so when people say don't vote, it's funny how people say when they say don't vote, they say don't vote for the Democrats.
Right.
Now Trump is in the White House.
Right.
So whoa. Why don't we say if there are no reparations, don't vote for President Trump?
Right.
But nobody say why? I was trying to check that out now.
Right.
The Democrats are doing what they can do. They probably will pass the bill.
Yeah.
Because that's the steps. You have hearing, markup, vote.
Right.
And so we're on our way. This is not to say there aren't contradictions.
Sure.
This is not to say that the Democrats have not historically taken us for granted. We know they have.
Right.
But each time, each election cycle, you got to push that envelope.
Exactly.
Are you going to take us for granted? Are you going to take us for granted this time, or are you going to answer what our demands are? And one of our demands right now is that HR 40 be passed. This is a long struggle. It ain't going nowhere. This is the struggle for reparations. And COBRA is the organization that's been leading that struggle.
Absolutely. Let's pause it there. Okay. We got to pause it there because we're running out of time. Watch the full interview. It's about 12 minutes at our YouTube channel because I just uploaded it to YouTube. Michael Imhotep, IMHOTEP on YouTube. Watch the full interview there. I did with Dr. Mark Thompson. Next week we'll have the interview I did with our sister, our warrior Rose Sanders. Okay. I got to get to this clip here. This is Dr. Julianne Malveaux. She was the economist, African American female economist, and I firmly believe if she had been a man, they would have directed more questions to her. Here she is. She was interviewed by David Gura on MSNBC. Let's go to this clip. Okay, she was interviewed on Up by David Gura, June 22nd, and she talked about the HR 40. She talked about the fight for reparations. She dealt with the legacy of slavery. And she's an economist, so she tied this into the wealth gap. She tied this into the race pay disparity as well. Let's go to this clip.
I'm David Gura, and right now there is a national debate gaining momentum on whether reparations should be paid to African Americans. But the idea of whether the United States should provide compensation to the descendants of slaves is anything but new. The legislation was first introduced in Congress 3 decades ago. This conversation goes back to just after Emancipation. While some worry that it would be nothing more than a blank check on Americans' original sin, others are concerned it will take more than money to end the racial wealth divide. During this week's hearing, economist Julianne Malveaux gave testimony on the structural inequalities that exist in this country today.
We can go back and look at the minimum wage, which exclude farm workers in the South, which were predominantly black people, excluded domestic workers who were black women. And so these folks were excluded not only from the minimum wage, but also from the Social Security system. I want y'all, Congress people, to deal with issues of economic structure, and an economic structure has generated an inequality that makes it difficult for people to live their lives. When zip code determines what kind of school that you go to, when zip code determines what kind of food you can eat. These are the vestiges of enslavement that a lot of people don't want to deal with.
Dr. Julianne Malveaux joins us now. She's an economist. She's the former president of Bennett College. And Dr. Malveaux, thank you very much for the time. I'm going to read one line from your testimony. You said, it is not time but overtime to deal with the issues of economic justice and reparations that bring us here. I think there'll be a lot of people wondering about this moment, why this seems to be gathering such speed now. And what's your sense of that?
Well, Dave, first of all, thank you for having me on. This is such an important issue. You see the wealth gap, and the wealth gap determines the quality of people's lives. African Americans have like $1 for every $20 that white people have in wealth. We have 60% of the income. And so we have to understand why this happened. It's not because black people haven't done what they're supposed to do. People work very hard. It's because of the structural inequality that is built into our system. And that's the thing that I find very frustrating that people don't want to talk about. People like to talk about, they have those two Republican witnesses about pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, right? But Dr. King, back in the day, said we have come to the nation's capital to cash a check, but that check has been marked insufficient funds. That's the story of reparations and of H.R. 40.
Dr. Malveaux, how do you define this term? I mentioned that sense that it's a blank check. It's a check to those who are descendants of slaves. You talked about the need to focus on community repair. How do you understand what reparations would look like, what form they would take?
It's preliminary to have a conversation about the form that they would take. Let's just establish that they occur. Let's pass H.R. 40. Let's deal with a commission to study this. I think that we can see the damage that's been done to the African American community. As I spoke to in my testimony, first of all, we've been denied the opportunity to participate. In other words, in 1862, the Homestead Act was passed, gave lots of land to lots of immigrants, but not black people. Number two, we have been denied the opportunity to accumulate. In other words, there have been laws that prevented black people from accumulating. Ida B. Wells began to document lynchings when black people had the nerve to compete with white folks in the economic mainstream. And third, we've had public policy violence towards black people. So, you know, a lot of people want to reduce it to a check. I don't want to reduce it to a check. I want to talk about community repair, which may include a check and maybe not.
Let me go from Dr. Malveaux to Dr. Greer.
Okay.
And
pause it right there. Okay, we're running out of time. Go to msnbc.com, watch that clip. That's from David Gura, that's from the day, June 23rd, 2019. And we'll play that again next week because I want to make sure we got the sister in. That's called Revisiting the Issue of Reparations. David Gura interviewed Dr. Julian Malveaux. Okay, running out of time. The GI Bill, I'll talk about that. I'll do a special broadcast this week. Visit the Black Agenda on Tour. The Black Agenda on Tour. Jice Johnson just sent me the flyer. So I'll be on the Black Agenda on Tour in Chicago, Saturday, July 13th. It's 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. I'll be on the panel. She just sent me the flyer. We put it on our Facebook fan page. Special guest David Banner, hip-hop artist David Banner. You've heard me interview him as well on the show. So Michi X, Jice Johnson, Cassiopeia are on the panel. Visit theblack-agenda-on-tour.com. It's hosted by Shay J, theblack-agenda-on-tour.com. And when we look at the GI Bill, we know June 22nd was the anniversary of the signing of the GI Bill signed by President Roosevelt in 1944. Even though it had a big impact on white Americans who served in World War II, white men who served in World War II, it ultimately shut doors for the 1.2 million African American veterans. Okay, when lawmakers began drafting the GI Bill in 1944, some Southern Democrats feared that returning African American veterans would use public sympathy for veterans to advocate against Jim Crow laws, to ensure that's legacy of slavery, Jim Crow laws, to ensure that the GI Bill largely benefited white people. The Southern Democrats drew on tactics that had previously been used to ensure that the New Deal helped as few African Americans as possible. During the drafting of the law, the chair of the House Veterans Committee, Mississippi Congressman John Rankin, played hardball and insisted that the program be administered by individual states instead of the federal government. Now, when you read the book, How White Folks Got So Rich, The Untold Story of American White Supremacy, they talk about that in that book as well. You've heard me talk about that book also, okay? So John Rankin played hardball and insisted that the program be administered by individual states instead of the federal government. He got his way, and Rankin was known for his virulent racism. He defended segregation, opposed interracial marriage, and had even proposed legislation to confine, then deport every person with Japanese heritage during World War II. Okay, read this full article at history.com, the official website of the History Channel, how the GI Bill's promise was denied to 1 million Black World War II veterans, how the GI Bill's promise was denied to 1 million Black World War II veterans. Okay, sorry we can't take any more calls. Robert, call back next week. Sorry about that. Visit our website, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com, AfricanHistoryNetwork.com. Register for our online course. You can order my latest DVD lectures there as well. Remember, at the African History Network, we focus on educating, empowering, and inspiring people of African descent throughout the diaspora and around the world. Right now, it's correct wrong behavior. It's not over till we win. Wakanda forever. Stay tuned for Pastor Mo. We'll talk to you next week. Peace. All right, guys. We're out of here. All right, guys. So I'll talk to you all. We'll broadcast tomorrow. I'll post some links to the articles. There's a lot of information I didn't get to. Sign up for the online course. Also, we'll meet Wednesday, 8 p.m. Talk to y'all later. Peace.
Yeah, say, well, like the one time.
Hold on. I put it on. Yeah, this is Pastor Mo. Who we have here? What's up, brother?
Hey,
what's up? Mr. Fuqua Bay?
Yes.
Yes, sir. Okay. More science of America?
Yes,
okay, brother.
Yeah, Islam. What up to y'all one time?
Pastor Mo.
I haven't had a chance to probably come on the show.
Yeah, his show is up next.
On the teacher show.
Yeah.
And give my love to everybody and say what up to y'all. Pastor Mo, the street sweeper. Peace and love to the great historian.
Yeah,
our teacher, our Detroit song, my brother. We love him. We thank God for him.
So he's on 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Okay, he's up next. All right, guys, gotta go. Gotta get out of here.